I should have seen it coming. Looking back, there were signs everywhere, like breadcrumbs leading straight to disaster. But when you're drowning in your final semester, 3 months away from graduation, you don't have the luxury of paranoia. My cousin Vesper had always been the golden child. While I was the family workhorse, the one who helped everyone with their homework, covered shifts at family gatherings, and somehow always ended up fixing everyone else's problems, Vesper was the princess. Beautiful, charming, and completely incapable of taking responsibility for anything. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I was in my tiny apartment, surviving on instant ramen and desperation, putting the finishing touches on my thesis about sustainable urban development. 2 years of research, countless sleepless nights, and every ounce of my soul poured into those 200 pages. Cousin Aspera's voice was honey-sweet through the phone. I have this huge presentation tomorrow for my capstone project, and my laptop completely died. Like, won't even turn on. I'm absolutely panicking. I should have said no. God, I should have said no. I just need to borrow yours for a few hours, she continued, already assuming my answer. I promise I'll be super careful. You know how important this is for me. The thing about being the responsible one in a dysfunctional family is that saying, no feels like betraying your identity. I'd been the fixer, the helper, the one who never let anyone down. My thesis was backed up in multiple places: cloud storage, external drives, email drafts. What could go wrong? Fine, I said, already regretting it. But I need it back by tomorrow evening. I have my defense next week. Of course. You're literally saving my life. She picked it up within an hour, all grateful smiles and promises. Watched her leave with my laptop tucked under her arm, feeling that familiar twist in my stomach that I'd learned to ignore over the years. The next evening came and went. No Vesper, no laptop, no response to my increasingly frantic texts. By Thursday, I was calling her repeatedly. When she finally answered, her voice was different, cold, distant. Oh, about that, she said casually. I had to take it to the repair shop. Something got corrupted. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean corrupted? I don't know. Some virus or something? They said they might be able to recover some files, but ... She trailed off with practiced indifference. I drove to her apartment immediately. She wasn't there. Her roommate, Quinlan, looked uncomfortable when I asked about the laptop. She said she returned it to you yesterday, he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. The lies were already starting. I spent the next 2 days in a panic, trying to reconstruct my thesis from partial backups and notes. Some of my cloud saves had been corrupted too, somehow. My external drive was mysteriously missing files. It was like someone had systematically hunted down every trace of my work. Then came the email that shattered my world. Dear Mr. Caspian, it began, it has come to our attention that your thesis submission contains substantial plagiarism. We have received an identical paper from another student that predates your submission by several days. I read it 3 times before the words penetrated, plagiarism, another student, predates my submission. My hands shook as I scrolled down to see the attached file. It was my thesis. Every word, every citation, every late-night revelation. But the author listed was Vesper Thorne, and the timestamp showed it had been submitted to her university 2 days before I'd even given her my laptop. The world tilted sideways. I called the department immediately, explaining the situation with growing hysteria. But the evidence was damning. She had submitted first. She had the earlier timestamp. And when they called her, she had a story ready. I'm so sorry, she told them, her voice heavy with fake sadness. Caspian is my cousin. I shared some of my research with him to help with his own project. I had no idea he would copy it word for word. This is so embarrassing for our family. The hearing was a formality. they'd already decided. Despite my protests, despite my drafts and research notes, despite everything I tried to present as proof, they had one simple fact. She submitted first. The evidence is clear. The committee chair said, his voice final. Academic dishonesty of this magnitude cannot be tolerated. Your enrollment is terminated effective immediately. I walked out of that building feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. 4 years of college, gone. My future, stolen. And somewhere across town, Vesper was probably celebrating her graduation. The worst part? She kept the laptop for another week, claiming the repair shop needed more time. When I finally got it back, it had been factory reset, clean as a whistle. No traces of anything. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the wreckage of my life, and I realized something that would haunt me for years. I had been so focused on being the good cousin, the helpful one, the responsible one, that I'd handed my destroyer the very weapon she used against me. The phone call to my parents was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. Mom cried. Dad went silent for a long time before asking, "Are you sure you didn't accidentally know, Dad?" I didn't accidentally steal my own work. But I could hear the doubt in his voice. That's what Vesper's lie had done. It made everyone question everything. My Aunt Cordelia's reaction was worse. I drove to her house the next day, desperate for someone, anyone, to believe me. She was Vesper's mother, but she'd always been like a second mom to me. She'd watched me grow up, seen me struggle, knew my character. I found her in her perfect kitchen. Making tea like this was just another Tuesday. Aunt Cordelia, I began, my voice cracking. I need you to know what really happened. She listened to the whole story with a neutral expression, occasionally nodding. When I finished, she set down her teacup and looked at me with those cold eyes I'd never seen directed at me before. Caspian, she said slowly, you're clearly upset. But Vesper told me her version of events, and frankly, it sounds more believable. The room felt like it was spinning. More believable. She said you'd been struggling with your thesis for months, that you seemed desperate. She was trying to help you by sharing her research, and you took advantage of her kindness. I stared at her, speechless. This was the woman who'd bandaged my scraped knees, who'd celebrated my honor roll achievements, who'd always told me I was special. You know me, I whispered. You know I would never. I know you've always been jealous of Vesper, she interrupted. She's always had things come easier to her. Maybe you saw an opportunity and took it. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. She stole my laptop. She deleted my files. That's enough. Her voice was sharp now. Vesper is graduating summa cum laude. She has a job lined up at a prestigious firm. She's moving on with her life. Maybe you should too. I stood up, my legs shaking. I can't believe you're defending her. I'm not defending anyone. I'm just telling you the truth. She stood too, suddenly looking older, more tired. That's life, Caspian. Learn to be smarter next time. Those words. God, those words would echo in my head for years. I walked out of that house and knew I was walking away from more than just my aunt. I was walking away from a family that had chosen their golden child over the truth. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers who couldn't help it's a civil matter. Not criminal appeals that went nowhere. The evidence is conclusive. And job interviews that ended when they asked about my incomplete degree. My parents tried to be supportive, but I could see them struggling with doubt. They'd known Vesper her whole life too. She was family. And family doesn't destroy family, right? Wrong. The worst part was watching her thrive. Social media became a torture device. There she was at graduation, beaming in her cap and gown, surrounded by congratulations. There she was, starting her new job, posting about her exciting projects and bright future. All built on the foundation of my stolen work. I deleted all my accounts, blocked her number, blocked my aunt's number. Started avoiding family gatherings where I might have to see either of them. But even in isolation, the damage was done. I'd lost more than my degree. I lost my faith in justice, in family, in the idea that good things happen to good people. My savings ran out quickly. I took a job at a warehouse, loading trucks and trying not to think about what I'd lost. My coworkers were kind but distant. They couldn't understand why someone with almost 4 years of college was stacking boxes for minimum wage. I couldn't understand it either. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying every moment, every decision. What if I'd said no? What if I'd been more careful with my backups? What if I'd been smarter, like Aunt Cordelia said? But slowly, buried under all that self-doubt, something else was growing. Something harder and colder than the grief dot. Rage, not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly. The slow, steady kind that builds foundations. The kind that makes plans. I started researching digital forensics, learning about file recovery, timestamp analysis, metadata tracking. If I ever got another chance, I wouldn't be the naive kid who trusted family blindly. I wouldn't be the victim again. 6 months after my expulsion, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to rebuild my life, but I was going to do it differently. Smarter, harder, and if I ever got the chance to show Vesper what that's life really meant, I was going to take it. The community college acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not exactly the triumphant return to academia I'd dreamed of, but it was a start. I'd spent 8 months working warehouse shifts, saving every penny, and studying for placement exams in my spare time. Professor Brennan was the first person in almost a year to look at me like I was worth something. She taught Introduction to Computer Science, and when I mentioned my interest in digital forensics during office hours, her eyes lit up. "There's a growing field in cybersecurity," she said, pulling up course catalogs on her ancient computer. "Have you considered information systems?" I hadn't. My original plan had been urban planning, but that dream felt like it belonged to someone else now. Someone naive. Someone who believed the world was fair. "The thing about digital evidence," she continued, "is that it never really disappears. Even when people think they've erased everything, traces remain. It's like archaeology, but for data." Something clicked. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just the universe's twisted sense of humor. But I knew I'd found my new path. I threw myself into my studies with the intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose. Computer science, network security, digital forensics. I devoured every textbook, every online course, every certification program I could find. My parents were cautiously optimistic. "It's good to see you motivated again," Mom said during one of our weekly calls. She never mentioned Vesper anymore. And I never asked. The community college credits transferred to State University's Information Systems program. Not as prestigious as my original school, but they had an excellent cybersecurity track and professors who actually cared about their students. Professor Valdez became my mentor. She was a former FBI digital forensics specialist who'd moved to academia after 20 years in the field. She saw something in me that I was only beginning to recognize myself. "You have the temperament for this work," she told me after I'd recovered supposedly deleted files from a practice hard drive. "Patient, methodical, and you don't give up easily." If only she knew. I graduated summa cum laude 3 years later. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same honors that Vesper had supposedly earned with my stolen work. But this time, I'd earned it legitimately. The job offers started coming in my final semester. Tech companies, government agencies, consulting firms. All wanting someone with my skill set and academic record. I chose Meridian Analytics, a cybersecurity firm that specialized in corporate investigations. They offered me a position as a junior digital forensics analyst, with a salary that was triple what I'd made at the warehouse. My first case involved tracking down insider trading through email metadata. My second helped expose a corporate embezzlement scheme. By my third case, I was working independently, trusted with sensitive investigations. I was good at this. Better than good. I had a talent for finding things people thought they'd hidden, for following digital breadcrumbs that others missed. Maybe it was because I understood what it felt like to be victimized by someone who thought they were smarter than everyone else. Maybe it was because I'd learned to be paranoid, to assume the worst and work backwards from there. Or maybe it was because every case reminded me of my own unsolved mystery, the one that had started this whole journey. 3 years into my career, I was promoted to senior analyst. 5 years in, I was leading my own team. 7 years in, I was offered a position as director of digital investigations. I'd rebuilt my life completely. New career, new skills, new reputation. I had a corner office, a team of talented analysts, and the respect of my peers. I was invited to speak at conferences, to consult on high-profile cases, to train law enforcement on digital evidence recovery. But there was still a hollow space. Inside me, a wound that professional success couldn't heal. I'd created new social media accounts under my professional name, carefully curated to show my achievements. I told myself it was for networking, but really, I was hoping she'd find me someday, hoping she'd see what I'd become despite her betrayal. She never did. In quiet moments, I'd find myself researching her. Vesper had done well for herself too, it seemed. She'd parlayed her stolen thesis into a job at a mid-tier consulting firm, worked her way up to project manager, and appeared to be living a comfortable life. She'd never had to rebuild from nothing, never had to question everything she believed about fairness and justice, never had to learn the hard way that the world doesn't care about your intentions, only your results. That was about to change. The email arrived on a Thursday morning, forwarded from HR. Application for digital forensics intern position. The subject line read, I almost deleted it automatically. We got dozens of intern applications every week, but something made me open it. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was that sixth sense I developed over the years. The one that told me when something was worth investigating. The name at the bottom of the cover letter made. My blood stopped moving. Vesper Thorne, 10 years. 10 years since she'd stolen my life, and here she was, applying to work for me. The cover letter was polished, professional, highlighting her experience in project management and her interest in transitioning to cybersecurity. She had no idea who I was. My professional name was listed as C. Brennan Rivers. I'd legally changed my surname years ago, partly for privacy in my work, partly to shed the last connections to my old life. I read the application 3 times, my hands shaking slightly. This was it. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since the day I'd walked out of that university hearing. She wanted to work in digital forensics. She wanted to learn about finding hidden truths, about recovering deleted files, about proving what really happened when people tried to cover their tracks. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. I scheduled the interview for the following week. I spent the weekend preparing like I was going to trial. 3 different outfits considered and discarded. Voice exercises to make sure I sounded professional and not like the broken kid she destroyed. Deep breathing techniques to control my heart rate. Most importantly, I researched her. 10 years of digital breadcrumbs, social media posts, professional networking profiles. I mapped out her entire life since graduation, looking for patterns, weaknesses, anything that might be useful. She'd done well, but not exceptionally. The consulting firm she'd worked for had laid her off 6 months ago in a round of budget cuts. She'd been freelancing since then, taking on smaller projects, clearly struggling to find her footing. Perfect. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early and spent an hour in my bathroom mirror, practicing neutral expressions. In the reflection, I could see traces of the kid I'd been, the one who'd trusted family, who'd believed in fairness, who'd thought being helpful would be rewarded. But mostly, I saw what I'd become: harder, smarter, patient. At 2 p.m., my assistant knocked on my door. "Ms. Thorne is here for her interview. Send her in." The door opened and she walked in, exactly as I remembered, but somehow smaller, still beautiful, still carrying herself with that easy confidence that had always made me feel inadequate. But there were lines around her eyes now, a slight tension in her shoulders that suggested things hadn't been as easy as her social media implied. "Ms. Thorne," I said, standing and extending my hand. "I'm Brennan Rivers, Director of Digital Investigations. Please, have a seat." She shook my hand with a firm grip, looking directly into my eyes with no flicker of recognition. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me, Mr. Rivers. I'm very excited about this opportunity." I gestured to the chair across from my desk and settled back into my own, keeping my expression neutral. "I've reviewed your application. Your background is primarily in project management and consulting. What draws you to digital forensics?" She launched into what was clearly a rehearsed answer about the growing importance of cybersecurity, the intellectual challenges of the field, her desire to make a difference. I nodded at appropriate intervals, studying her face for any sign that she suspected who I was. Nothing. "Tell me about a time you had to solve a complex problem under pressure," I said, leaning forward slightly. She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Well, there was this situation in college that really taught me about thinking on my feet. I was working on my capstone project, a comprehensive analysis of sustainable urban development strategies. And I had this major technical crisis right before the deadline. My blood turned to ice, but I kept my expression neutral." "What kind of crisis?" "My computer crashed completely. Lost everything. I had to reconstruct the entire project from scratch in just a few days. It was terrifying, but I managed to pull it together and actually ended up with a better final product than I'd originally planned." The lie came so easily, so naturally. She'd told it so many times it had become her truth. "That must have been incredibly stressful," I said carefully. "How did you manage to reconstruct everything so quickly?" "A lot of late nights and coffee," she laughed. "But I'd been thinking about the project for months, so the ideas were all there. I just had to put them down on paper again. Sometimes a crisis forces you to clarify your thinking, you know?" I nodded, making notes on my legal pad. "And this project it was well received." "Oh yes. I graduated summa cum laude largely because of that work. It opened doors for me professionally." She paused, looking slightly wistful. "Actually, it's funny, I later found out that a cousin of mine submitted a very similar paper to his school and got caught for plagiarism. Family drama, you know? But it just goes to show how important it is to be original in academic work." Audacity took my breath away. She'd taken my story, inverted it, and made herself the victim of intellectual theft. In her version, I was the plagiarist who'd stolen from her. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "Academic integrity is certainly crucial in this field. Our work often ends up in legal proceedings, so accuracy and honesty are non-negotiable." "Absolutely. I completely understand that." We continued for another 20 minutes, discussing her technical skills, her salary expectations, her availability. She was qualified for the internship, not exceptional, but competent. Under normal circumstances, I might have hired her, but these weren't normal circumstances. "Well, Miss Thorne," I said finally, "I think we've covered everything. I have a few more candidates to interview, but I should have a decision by the end of the week." She stood, extending her hand again. "Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Rivers. I really hope we'll have the chance to work together." "I'm sure we will," I said, shaking her hand. One way or another. She left, and I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. 10 years of wondering, of imagining what I might say or do if I ever got this chance. And she'd walked right into my office without a clue. But I wasn't the same person she'd destroyed. I wasn't going to act on impulse or emotion. I was going to be smart about this. I was going to be smarter than she was. That evening, I opened my laptop and began typing an email to HR. I'm pleased to inform you that we'll be extending an offer. To Vesper Thorne for the digital forensics intern position, please prepare the standard 6-month contract and onboarding materials. She wanted to learn about digital forensics. She wanted to understand how to find hidden truths and recover deleted files. I was going to give her the education of a lifetime. Vesper started the following Monday. I watched from my office window as she walked into the building, carrying a new laptop bag and wearing the kind of eager expression that made me remember, for just a moment, what it had felt like to be hopeful about the future. I'd briefed my team carefully. We have a new intern starting today. I want everyone to make her feel welcome, but I'll be handling her training personally. She has potential, but she needs close supervision. My assistant Marcus raised an eyebrow. You usually delegate intern training. This one's different, I said. Special case. The first few weeks were almost mundane. I assigned her basic research tasks, taught her how to use our forensic software, explained the fundamentals of digital evidence recovery. She was attentive, asked good questions, and seemed genuinely interested in learning. It was almost easy to forget why she was really there, almost, but then she'd make comments that reminded me exactly who she was. Little things, casual cruelties disguised as observations. God, some people are so careless with their data, she said one afternoon, reviewing a case where an employee had tried to delete evidence of embezzlement. Like, how stupid do you have to think files just disappear when you delete them? Or, I feel bad for people who get caught up in these investigations. Usually they're just in over their heads, you know? They make bad decisions and then try to cover them up instead of just admitting they screwed up. Each comment was a small knife twist, a reminder of how effortlessly she'd lied about what she'd done to me. But I was patient. I'd learned patience. 6 weeks into her internship, I gave her access to our case management system. I want you to start reviewing closed cases, I explained. Understanding how investigations unfold from start to finish will help you develop analytical skills. She nodded eagerly, thrilled to be trusted with more responsibility. What she didn't know was that I'd been spending my evenings preparing for this moment. I'd recovered every piece of digital evidence from my stolen laptop, traced every file deletion, documented every lie she'd told. 10 years of professional experience had taught me tricks that teenage me never could have imagined. I'd also been building a new case file, a very special case file. 3 days later, she knocked on my office door. Mr. Rivers, I've been going through those old cases, and I found something weird. I looked up from my computer. What kind of weird? There's a file in the system that doesn't seem to belong to any active case. It's just sitting there with a really strange file name. She paused, looking confused. Actually, it looks like it might be academic work, like a thesis or something. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice level. That is strange. Can you show me? She led me to her workstation, where she'd opened a file titled sustainable_urban_development_final_draft_court_2015.docx. My thesis. The original version, complete with my name, my student ID, my professor's feedback comments. But more importantly, it was time-stamped with the original creation date 3 months before she'd ever touched my laptop. I don't understand, she said, staring at the screen. This looks like serious academic work, but why would it be in our system? I leaned over her shoulder, pretending to examine the file. That is odd. The metadata shows this was created years ago, but it's definitely not one of our cases. I paused, as if thinking. What did you say the file name was? Sustainable_urban_development_final_draft_2C10_2015. CT, I mused. Those might be initials. And 2015, that's a graduation year. I straightened up, my expression thoughtful. You know what? This might be evidence from an old academic misconduct case. We sometimes get asked to help universities with complex plagiarism investigations. Her face went white. Plagiarism. It's more common than you'd think. Students stealing each other's work. Professors not catching it until years later. That sort of thing. I kept my voice conversational, professional. The really interesting cases are the ones where the theft is so complete that it's hard to determine who the original author was. She was staring at the screen with growing horror. But this, says CT. What if CT isn't the thief? What if they're the victim? That's always possible. Digital forensics is about following the evidence, wherever it leads. I moved to my own computer, pulling up what appeared to be a case file. Let me see if I can find the associated investigation. My fingers flew over the keyboard, calling up documents I'd spent weeks preparing. Bank statements showing my student loan payments. Email chains with my professors. Draft versions of the thesis showing its evolution over 2 years of research, and then, coup de grace, security footage from the university library, showing me working on the thesis for months before Vesper had ever borrowed my laptop. This is incredible, I said, my voice filled with what sounded like professional fascination. Look at this timeline. The original author, this CT person, was working on this project for almost 2 years, but then it's pulled up another file. Someone else submitted it first.